President-elect Biden is doing all he can to transition smoothly into the White House, but he's been forced to do it alone. That's because President Trump has yet to accept the results of the election. Mr. Biden is dismissing President Trump's refusal to concede. The president-elect says it will not slow down his transition efforts. Skylar Henry has more from Washington.
President Trump commemorated Veterans Day, laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. While President-elect Joe Biden took time out from working on the transition to attend a ceremony in Philadelphia.
In their memory and all those others who did not come home.
The Trump campaign filed a new 234-page lawsuit in Michigan Tuesday with affidavits from people claiming they witnessed voting irregularities. One Republican challenger said poll workers used their bodies to prevent her from watching and observing the counting process. Another claimed poll workers rolled their eyes when they saw ballots with Trump votes.
None of these accounts are first person. None of these accounts were brought in a timely fashion. There are some serious questions about all of the testimony that's offered.
President Trump's refusal to accept the outcome of the election means President-elect Joe Biden is not receiving daily intelligence briefings incoming presidents typically receive.
Access to classified information is useful. But I'm not in a position to make any decisions on those issues anyway. There's one, as I said, one president at a time.
Mr. Biden received calls from world leaders Tuesday, including British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and French President Emmanuel Macron.
I'm ready to congratulate you.
However, CBS News has confirmed the State Department is not assisting with those calls. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo suggested Tuesday there may not be a Biden administration.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
President-elect Biden said Republicans will eventually accept his presidency.
For more, I want to turn to CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes in our D.C. bureau. Hi, Nancy. So, as you know, several world leaders have called to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory, including UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Germany's Angela Merkel, France's Emmanuel Macron. Others, like India's Narendra Modi and Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, have issued Twitter statements. And then there are the 4 Republican senators who've recognized Mr. Biden as the president-elect. Nancy, why aren't more Republicans willing to acknowledge Mr. Biden's victory?
Well, the interesting thing, Tanya, is they do acknowledge it when you talk to them privately, and their aides acknowledge as well that President-elect Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. But they refuse to do so publicly, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, they are worried that they will anger not just President Trump, but his voters. They know that those voters can be more loyal to him than they are to them in some cases. And they know that they've got 2 big Senate races coming up in Georgia that will decide the control of the Senate. And so they don't want to do anything that would rock the boat, make those voters dejected, even though the writing is clearly on the wall now. Beyond that, they're worried about poking the bear, if you will. They've had negative experiences in the past when they have contradicted this president. They are worried that that they might actually cause him to dig in and get even more belligerent about leaving if he feels like he's being pushed out the door by his own party. Now, I do wonder what will happen and whether their stance will change, this sort of silence that they're maintaining, now that the president is actually taking moves to fire people at the Pentagon, put his own loyalists in, not just at the Department of Defense, but other agencies as well. This stops being a game at this point and becomes much more serious and perhaps more than they bargained for. So what I'll be watching for in the next couple of days is whether they change their stance, start to get a little more public about the reality of the situation, now that they see that it's not just that he won't go quietly, it's that he may make some moves that they themselves don't like on the way out the door.
Right. And Nancy, of course, Republican senators don't seem to believe that there's any fraud in their own races. You asked 4 GOP lawmakers who are up for re-election this cycle, including Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, about these allegations. Let's listen to the responses.
Was there any fraud in your race as far as you know?
I don't believe so. Iowa has a really great election system, and I trust the integrity of our process. It's
Do
a
you
good
suspect
system.
fraud anywhere else?
I can't speak to that, so I really can't.
Did you notice any fraud in your race?
I didn't.
But if the accusation is baseless, do you as an elected official have a responsibility to say so?
The courts have the responsibility to make that determination. We will allow the courts to do their work.
Was there any fraud in your Senate race or any Senate race that you know of?
I don't know. At the risk of bragging, it wasn't very close.
So, of course, Nancy, those are great questions because, you know, if there's only fraud when you don't like the winner, you know, what does that say about democracy, right?
Right, and I should point out that those were all Republicans who won their races, but we aren't hearing accusations of fraud from Republicans who lost their races either. They would typically be the ones, if they felt that things were handled unfairly, who would speak up. But we just aren't seeing accusations of fraud at any other level than the presidential level and from Mr. Trump and his allies, even though, you know, we're now more than a week out from the election and they haven't really been able to mount any credible case that fraud actually took place. And I should point out that a number of news outlets have actually contacted secretaries of state in every state, the New York Times in particular, and those officials have said that they didn't see any evidence of fraud in their states. So the question now is, how long does this legal process play out? And how long do Republicans sort of stand by and wait for the courts to be the ones to essentially tell President Trump that his options have been depleted so that they don't have to step in and do the dirty work?
Right. And Nancy, you pointedly asked Majority Leader McConnell about why he continues to indulge President Trump's allegations of fraud, given that he hasn't provided any proof. And let's listen to McConnell's response.
Well, what I'm going to do here in the Senate is concentrate on the business that we have left to do, which I mentioned a while ago. An omnibus appropriation bill, maybe another coronavirus package, and let the presidential election go through the various stages that it goes through under the Constitution. There will be apparently litigation. Those cases will be decided. And then the Electoral College will meet. And then we'll have the inauguration. But I am going to concentrate on what we are trying to do here in the remainder of this Congress.
So I guess the question is, does he have anything to lose for, you know, not sticking his neck out? Because as we know, it's now all about the Senate. Today, CBS News projects that Alaska Republican Senator Dan Sullivan will win re-election against independent hopeful Al Gross. So that gives Republicans 50 seats in the Senate and needing to win just one of the two Georgia runoffs to clinch a majority. There's been a lot of reporting on the relationship between Mr. Biden and Senate Majority Leader McConnell. What do we know about that? And how is it different than the relationship McConnell had with President Obama?
Well, he has a much deeper relationship with President-elect Biden that stretches back decades. They served for, I believe, 22 years together in the U.S. Senate before Biden left the Senate to become vice president of the United States. And even when he was vice president, Biden was often dispatched to the Senate to negotiate with Mitch McConnell. So they have a deep working relationship. McConnell once said that while he doesn't always agree with Biden, he definitely trusts him implicitly. Some Democrats, I should point out, have been a little frustrated with the president-elect over the years because they felt that he gave too much to McConnell in the interest of striking a deal. Now, I have to stress that the fact that they work well together does not necessarily mean that you're going to see, if McConnell retains the majority in the Senate, some outbreak of bipartisanship and major compromise legislation. I think that McConnell, while he will be able to talk frankly with Biden and vice versa, his positions and the positions of the Republicans who he represents and leads are not going to change. And that is that they have been staunchly opposed to major immigration reform, additions, changes to Obamacare, big environmental legislation. And I don't think that that's going to change just because he has a direct line with the new president of the United States.
All right, so keeping an eye on that Senate, how are both Republicans and Democrats already planning for what's sure to be an expensive battle for those Georgia Senate seats? Do Democrats want Mr. Biden to get involved in any way, or are they just going to, let this play out?
I think they're going to let him stay first in Wilmington, then in Washington. They would rather that he focus on the transition, that he continue to look presidential, show those Georgia voters who just elected him by this very narrow margin that he's kind of above the fray and getting ready to do his job. But that doesn't mean that they don't want other big-name Democrats to come into Georgia and campaign on behalf of the two Democratic candidates, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. They'd love it if former President Obama were to come down. They certainly want to see a lot of Stacey Abrams, who came very close to winning the governor's race there a couple of years ago. But this is going to be an incredibly hard-fought race. There are some estimates that it could cost $1 billion, just these two races alone. And while Biden did eke out a very small victory in Georgia, which was a big change for Democrats, in the Senate races, the Republicans actually edged out the Democrats in both races. I mean, there was this special election, which is not exactly apples to oranges because you had 20 different candidates. But when you add up all the Republicans in the race, you add up all the Democrats that were in that race, the Republicans got a little bit more. And then obviously David Perdue got a little bit more than Jon Ossoff. He just didn't hit 50%, which is why that race is going to a runoff. And so both parties are going to be throwing everything they have at that race. I think you'll see a lot of ads where they're accusing the other side of being extreme. And, the stakes couldn't be higher here, Tanya. So it is going to be something that really rivets the political world for the next couple of months.
We'll all be watching closely. All right. Well, Nancy Cordes, thank you.
You're welcome.